Good day, everyone, and welcome to Merv and Tim. We're going to have a wonderful discussion today, and we're going to discuss about mentorship and mentors. What is a mentor, and what is not a mentor? But before we do that, let me tell you a little story. Do you remember the Rainier beer commercials with the bear in the stream?
Yep.
I had the privilege when I was working at the Pacific Northwest of walking through the beer refinery. Okay, it was the last day that they had open, and we did a beer tasting. Now, beer tasting out of tin cans is a little different, but it was fun because the guy who was there was actually the shift manager, and he wasn't the regular tour director, and he was about 65 years old, and he was round, and he had a nose like a cauliflower, and his face looked like Popeye, right? He had a squint eye in one way. But when he actually started taking us through the hops vineyards, right? And he said, look at these hops. And you could see 45 years of experience in his fingers, the way he touched them, the way he smelled them. All of a sudden, you could see 3 decades drop off him. And I said, that is a man I can learn from. It has nothing to do with his knowledge, which has to be better than anybody else's in the world. It has the way he can engage your interest and curiosity. And that was when I learned what I needed from my mentors. It clicked right there that day, underneath the sun in August, in that smelly place with those green and browning hops. And I will never forget what that moment was like. And I know more about hops in the 5 minutes I spent with him than in the 20 years I spent learning how to brew beer. That was wonderful. How about you, Merv? What was your experience with a mentor? Your first time you knew you were with somebody who you could really call a mentor?
Well, it was probably my dad, but you just reminded me of something. When my wife and I took a trip to Europe a few years ago, we went to what was then known as the Czech Republic, which is my heritage. My grandparents are from there. And in the Czech Republic, we went to a place called, what was the name of it now? It was the Pilsner. It's where Pilsner beer. Oh, it's Pilsen. Pilsen Czech.
Ah,
Now it's called Czechia, but Pilsen Brewery, which is one of the oldest breweries in the world. And so we actually went down there, and you're talking about mentors, people who could keep that thing going for several hundred years and still make some of the best beer in the world. That is mentorship passing down by itself. So your story reminded me of my story of sitting in that kind of a historic place.
it's
But,
amazing.
but I
Go
would,
ahead.
yeah, I would say probably my first mentor, and we'll probably get into a definition thing here shortly, but my first mentor would have been my dad. I grew up, as I mentioned on a previous podcast, on a working wheat farm. My father was a farmer. My grandfather before him was a farmer. My uncle across the road was a farmer. So we were all expected as young men to become farmers, and many of my girl cousins also. But I remember, I think the first time, besides the fact that he would take me on the tractor and show me how to plow, take me on the tractor and show me how to do certain things. But I remember very specifically one time we were harvesting grain, and he said I needed to back the grain truck up to the auger so that we could auger the grain from the truck up into the bins. And I'm thinking, this is this monstrous truck, and I had to pinpoint hit an auger that was less than a foot wide to be able to dump the grain into the auger and be able to deal with this. And I'm thinking, I don't know how to do this. I'm 14 years old or 13 years old at the time. I could barely reach the pedals in the truck, but my dad patiently showed me how to very carefully, very skillfully back that truck up without damaging anything, with pinpoint accuracy, so that we could lift the truck up and auger the grain up into the bin. And it sounds like it's just a silly little thing, but I learned more, I think, from that perspective, even as a 13-year-old, thinking I could not have done this without dad being patient and kind because you make some mistakes and you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment that could be damaged with a slip of a clutch. So that was probably my first very practical introduction into mentorship.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. You were speaking of getting into defining a mentor. Let's just get that out of the way real quickly. How do you define mentor and mentorship?
I think for me, I'm an avid reader and I love the old boyhood stories. I remember Johnny Tremaine and when he became an apprentice. And I remember thinking, what's an apprentice? And I think for me, mentorship in the 21st century is much like apprenticeship in the 17th and 18th centuries, where someone who is uneducated, inexperienced, comes under the tutelage of someone who has the experience. And it's not just for a one skill, one time, one effort, a few weeks here or something, but it's sort of a multi-year, multi session kind of introduction into more than just a single skill, but into sort of a way of life. So that's kind of how I would define mentorship. Thinking about my dad showing me how to back up the green truck, he taught me that skill, but the mentorship was how to farm. That was just one piece of how to farm. So that's a long-winded approach. But what about you, Tim? How would you define mentorship?
Well, relationship.
Good.
It's a relationship and it's advice. It's basically what I've learned from, finding somebody who has more knowledge and experience that I have
Yep.
and having them impart to me. It actually is much more successful when we actually engage more successfully. So I think mentorship has to do with relationship and with the imparting of knowledge, but mentorship is not like other types of education and training. It has to do more with the exploration of the mentee being able to try and experience as the mentor gives advice. It's a relationship that's not constrained to a skill or a certain number of steps in the right sequence.
Right.
That's how I come about it, and from uh, my best experiences of mentorship were like you were talking about. I had my son's scoutmaster when he was in grade school in Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts, was always mentoring me. He was always doing that, and he actually was teaching us parents without us knowing it. And he was one of the things that he imparted to me is, if you want to be a good leader, especially leading your children, you're constantly looking for these things called teachable moments and creating those teachable moments where their minds are open and flexible. And he went on to say there's a lot of accountability and responsibility for this, and here are the techniques. But just understanding that you are, as a mentor, not giving out skills, but you're providing support and environment. We're getting into that space that we call servant leadership, right?
Right. Yeah.
And that's how I do it. It's still a little too tacit, but that's that's the idea I have of a mentor.
I agree. I 100% agree with that. That's again, the idea is that it is a relational thing, but it's more than just, when I used the example of my dad with the grain truck, if I had limited to that one skill, then he would have been my coach. But because, forget the fact that he was my dad and so was my mentor in life, but the fact that he was teaching me farming, it was more than just teaching me that skill. It was the patience that he did it with. It was the showing me that I was allowed to make a mistake, showing me that there was more than one way to do things, showing me the practical aspects of how to line things. I mean, there was just all of these things that came into play that had nothing to do with just that single skill, but in fact, that I could take what he taught me there and apply it to other skills that I also needed to learn in learning farming. But unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I don't know, I did not stay on the farm. I elected instead to take a career in the computer sciences, and in particular in project management. So I was thinking also with this question, how would that apply to me in project management as well? And I'd like to hear from you first, Tim. If I were to ask you who your favorite, or who your probably your best mentor in your career, let's do that. We'll talk about other mentors, but let's talk about your career. Who was your best mentor in your career, and why would that be?
My first project management mentor was my supervisor, and I was working with a package company, a transportation industry, right? One of the biggies. And I was learning how to be an industrial engineer, and I was hired to be an technology specialist, and we eventually created a local help desk for the company. And he was an old crusty guy again. I don't know why, but I always attracted old crusty guys. He was about 6'4" and looked like Fred Munster. And he would go out on breaks and smoke, and nobody else smoked, but he just, continued the conversation. He was just so interesting to listen to. And as he was talking, he would be saying things like, you know what? You're working on that project over there. Here's my advice. There are ways to do risk, but why don't you just slap 10% of the schedule at the end of it and call it buffer? Okay. It's not the way you're supposed to do it, but it's better than nothing. And, little things like that, where you didn't even realize he was thinking about things. And he was actually bringing that into the conversation where he knew I was struggling with the problem. And he wanted to show me an easy way out. And the care and concern they provide. And you'd think that, you could take it one way, where they were saying, oh, just get it over with, just get the work done. And that's not what a leader does. A leader says, let's take time and show you how to do things in a way that's not just efficient, but moves things forward and helps you become successful. And so just doing that, and the way he conveyed it,
Oh,
he actually used our relationship and a lot of emotional intelligence to make sure that I didn't take it the wrong way. He was just casual and built it into our conversations. And again, it was only 3 or 4 years that I spent time under that supervisor, but I learned a decade of experience. It was beautiful.
yeah. Good.
Yeah. You brought up a topic here. You used the word coach. How would you differentiate what you think of as coach from mentor, and what is a coach?
Well, I think a coach has some of the same kinds of skills. They're one who instructs, or they're one who advises, or something in a specific skill. I mean, I was involved in sports all through my childhood, high school, into college. Um, I had a hockey coach, for example, who once a week or twice a week we went out, no, probably more than that actually. We went out onto the ice and he coached us in various drills and skills, so that when we got onto the ice to play, he was able to then coach from the bench. He was able to see how we would translate what he taught us during practice into how we conducted ourselves in the game. So he would send me, I remember so many times he'd be yelling across the ice, Merv, get back here. And I'd have to come in on the bench and he'd say, didn't I show you this in practice? You let that guy get around, whatever it was that he would tell me, but he would be coaching. But it was sort of like those moments, the practice, the game, and then he was out of my life. He had nothing else basically outside of that particular thing. So I would say from a coaching perspective, he drilled skills into me but he didn't really mentor me. It's not like I was going to take his lifestyle or what he was teaching me and apply it to other greater avenues of my life and become an NHL all-star or any of that kind of thing. So, whereas a mentor, I believe, is one who pours his life or invests part of his life into you. And I think that's the biggest difference for me between a coach and a mentor.
Yeah, we're in agreement on that definition. I had a voice coach when I was working on my first degree in fine arts and vocal performance, and he started off my first session with him saying, "Tim, we don't get along. I know you're totally different from me, so this is not about the relationship. Here's our expectation. You're coming in with this level of performance. At the end of the semester, you're going to have this level of performance. You're going to listen to me and you're going to obey what I say because I know more than you. That's all that we can both expect of this." And that's when I learned what coach is. It's like pragmatic. You need a skill,
Yeah.
and you're going to have these skills when we're done. And that's a coach. And sometimes, like you said, sometimes you need a coach. Sometimes you need a mentor.
So if I were to apply this to what we do as in our living, in earning our living as project managers, and I'm reminded, you and I were on a call earlier today with a book club, with a Project Management Institute book club, and we were discussing the whole idea of, I love your stories, but what is it? What were you like before, and what were you like after? And I was thinking about, as you were talking, if I were to take coaching into my experience as a project manager. For example, I had coaches along the way, some who taught me how to do requirements gathering, some who taught me how to do structured design, some who taught me how to write user acceptance testing scripts. Those are very specific skills. But if I were to apply mentorship to this, let me bring up one of probably my favorite, probably my best mentor in my field, was a man named Kerry Thomas. I'll use his name. I don't know if he'll ever listen to this podcast or hear it, but I can give him accolades at this time. I was a brand new project manager, my first major project. And I realized that after several weeks on the project that I did not have all of the requisite skills to bring this project home. And so I did what any self-respecting project manager would do. I picked up the phone, called my vice president and said, help, help. And rather than giving me what I call a career limiting move, which could have easily happened,
Right.
say, I understand where you're coming from. And he freed up a senior person, Kerry Thomas, from the Toronto operation, brought him to where I was in the US, and actually asked him to stay with me on the project for 18 months. And during that 18 months, he was largely the de facto project manager, but he did a lot of the work through me. And I remember almost every day at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, when everyone else went home, he and I would sit around in his office and discuss the events of the day. And he would show me where I did well that day. He would show me where he might have done things differently that day. And as we progressed through this, and as I learned more and more from him, it didn't matter about the skills of very specific things, but in terms of the overall idea of managing a project from the client's perspective, from my team's perspective, and most of all, to enhance my own career. So in doing that, he actually left after 13 months or 14 months rather than staying the full 18. He said, no, you're good. You're on your own. You can do this, no problem. And in fact, he was right. He judged it correctly. We were able to bring that project home on time, within budget, all of the kinds of things, with a satisfied client, all of the kinds of things that you would expect. So again, coming from the perspective of having heard that person in our book club discussions today, before that mentorship, I was very green and basically had book knowledge, basically had process knowledge. But after that mentorship, I had the people knowledge and some experience having watched a professional in play. So the before and after picture in only 13 months was incredible.
Wow. Wow. One of the things I think about this is where do I find these people? Where do you find these crusty old buckets of wisdom?
Well, in this case, I asked for help, right? So, but here, what's the old saying? When the student is ready, the master will come.
You know what? When I was asking that question, that sort of resonated in my head. I was wondering. It's strange. Go ahead and talk about that a little bit.
Well, and even as you were talking now, I just remember my wife and I, a couple of years ago, we went and bought her a new car. And we finally settled on a hybrid, a very nice looking car. And would you believe it that when we drove that car off the parking lot, every place I went, I saw that car everywhere. Why had I not seen that car before? But it's only when I became aware. And I think it's that thing as well. If I'm a self-aware person who wants to progress in life, in my career, I will become aware of those things in my life or those areas where I need to up my skills. The Carrie Thomas example. I was lost, so I went and asked for it, and the teacher did come. I think what happens is a lot of times a mentor and a mentee find each other just simply because the mentee is ready for that instruction. And therefore, like the car example, is looking and is aware of everything that he or she is needful of at that point.
Yeah, sort of like Herbert Maslow's law of the hammer, right?
Right.
When you have a hammer in your hand, everything looks like a nail. When you have a need in your hand, the teacher or the lesson or the mentor will be there. It, like you said, when you're ready for the lesson, and the mentor is always around you. It's just that you are one who needs to actually be open or see.
So what did you do to find mentors when you needed them?
Accident. It was, I hate to say that, but like you, I did go to certain focus areas. Like I knew when I was going to lose my job at a major corporation, I'm going to invest a lot in chapters, and I'm going to become a leader in a chapter because it gets me around a lot of people. And project management, especially PMI chapters, the leaders are reasonably successful, or they're looking for, people who have had success. So I put myself in a position where I thought I would see a lot of mentors. But it's funny because a lot of times I did this in my project work too. I was looking for people um, who had needed unique skills, right? Like we were taking on critical chain for a project, or we're doing that. And I was looking for a mentor and looking for a mentor, and I couldn't find one. And I said, okay, Tim, you're going to be the expert in this organization on that topic. Yeah. And Raymond, that's a good comment too. I appreciate that. You found a mentor when you were in a problem. Isn't that great?
Yeah.
And that's true. Crisis brings out the best in people. It makes us authentic when we have a problem, because those are times when we ask for help. But it's also a time when mentors who have the experience to understand their responsibility and accountability to actually stick their necks out and say, if anybody needs help or needs to talk, just call me.
As you were talking, the other thing that struck me was I've also learned from those who were particularly bad mentors. And when I say that, probably it's true in many parts of life, is I learned how not to do things. I remember one time I was walking across the street with this man who was at that point my self-appointed mentor. We're walking to a breakfast meeting, he, myself, and two or three other vice presidents. And we had our normal Tuesday morning breakfast meeting. And I remember us walking across the street, and he said something just completely stupid, berating all of us, me in particular. And I stopped in the middle of the street. I was so taken aback by his comment. It didn't matter if cars were coming or not. And I looked at him, I faced him directly on that street, and basically said things that I probably should not have said to him at that point. But what I took away from that moment was I will never in my entire career, no matter how exasperated I get with someone on my team, I will never treat them like that. And so sometimes you can learn from the bad experiences and the bad mentors. By the way, he did not last as my mentor very long after that.
Yeah, yeah, those individuals who teach you through grief and through crisis, um, they tend to move on fairly quickly, luckily.
Yes.
And yeah, I've had the same experience. It's not just the really stellar people who can teach you and who can mentor. If you actually approach life in a certain way, literally every moment can actually be a teachable moment. And that's when you take ownership of your own mentorship. And that actually is fun. I have this experience also where I teach, I throw myself at the mercy of 300 students a month. And these guys are incredible. They're smart, they're astute, they know how to get you into a logical box where you can't paint yourself out quickly. And they challenge you, not just question you, but they challenge you personally. And so these people who are human beings just like you, um, everybody all of a sudden becomes a mentor if you so desire. Now,
Yes.
again, we need to prioritize, do I need somebody who's healthy? Do I need somebody who's toxic? We all need to actually approach this from a logical standpoint, but I believe that mentors are there for, whatever you need when your mind is ready, not when the leader's ready.
Right. And I was thinking too, we kind of dealt with the project management side, but I was thinking some of my best mentors in life obviously did not come necessarily from my career. But I remember my grandfather, who is a long time deceased now, my paternal grandfather, I would consider him as a mentor in a way that he did not even know he was my mentor, and probably not even at the time. And I remember growing, as I grew up, I was fortunate, myself, my cousins, all of us, there was, I think, 13 of us at the time. We would gather in my grandparents' home, and my grandfather would just beam over, all of us, no favorites, nothing. But I remember after the fact, thinking back over my grandparents' existence, watching him, how he treated my grandmother with so much respect, watching him out in the barnyard, how he treated the animals with such kindness and care, watching him as he dealt with his brother-in-law who accused him of stealing from him, and how he dealt with him in a calm and rational logical manner, watching him as he dealt with each of us grandchildren, whether it was around the Thanksgiving table or just when we dropped in for a visit. It was amazing to me that as I thought back and watched him live his life, a poor dirt farmer who could show so much from his relationships to me that I could then take into my own life. And I haven't always been that same kind of person. But I'll tell you what, looking back at that, it sure made me think a lot about some of my actions. And so I think sometimes our mentors don't have to come from our career perspective. They don't have to come from anywhere. They don't even have to know they're our mentors, but we can gather that mentorship wherever we need to gather it.
And that actually brings up a good point. Some of my favorite mentors are books themselves.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll often pick up a book I've read 4 or 5 times, and it's a totally different book based on the lesson I need. And they talk about this, wandering around the bones of my teachers, right? That was I forget whether that was Seneca or Epictetus. He actually felt the same way. Go back to the books. These guys are your mentors too. They had full lives, successful or unsuccessful. And their advice is just as meaningful as the advice you have today.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I think one of mine was Dale Carnegie's, one of his good books, Dale Carnegie's, when he was,
We're going to have to talk about Dale
but
and
Dale,
Covey and the others. Yeah, yeah.
and then, oh, it just slipped my mind. See, that's what happens when you get, are we getting crusty in our old age, Tim?
Certainly are. Certainly are. And that's the joy.
Yeah, but you're right. The books themselves, and there's several books I've gone back to that are dog-eared, that are marked up, and I'll read it the next time and find more places to mark up and highlight in yellow, and to the point where it's almost unrecognizable, some of the pages. So yes, books are definitely our mentors, and we can learn a lot from them as well.
Great, great.
It's fun though. You can often tell someone who wrote a book to write the book versus someone who wrote a book that actually has a lesson to teach.
Yes, yes. And again, it's that passion they have.
Yeah.
It's not chasing revenue. It's chasing purpose. And they have a reason to talk about. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Um, Project management is a unique skill, and it's not for everybody
Yeah.
because it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. And so the project management mentors that I've met are the ones that are really compassionate about what they teach, and they really are engaged with the not just the topic itself, but the minutia. And they'll go. It's sort of like my grandfather when he was teaching me about rocks and lapidary, turning rocks into jewelry, and he would take a rock up and he'd say, "Isn't that beautiful?" And it was like, okay, I'm not just learning how to cut rocks here, am I, Grandpa? He's teaching me how to express and understand beauty. And that's where a mentor actually really shines above coaches.
Yeah.
They're teaching you not just the job, not just the knowledge, but the joy in learning and the joy in immersing yourself in something that you can find personal meaning in.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's a,
Yeah. I have a question for you. Project management has a history of saying mentorship, mentorship, mentorship. You need to have a mentor. What's your opinion about project management and their seeming connection? Is there a reason why project management talks about needing mentorship so much?
I think there is. Having been a project manager for all those years, every project is different. Every project presents different challenges. I think you and I talked about this before, that if it weren't for challenges and probably some of the people issues on projects, we wouldn't need project managers.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what happens is as you go through your career and you go from project to project, and typically you'll go from maybe a smaller project to a large, and as your experience grows, you'll go to a larger and a more complex and more complex. And all along the way, you're dealing with different issues and more challenging issues. And I think to have a mentor in each of those situations is very useful, because what I saw managing a $4 million project was not what I saw managing a $100 million project. The scale itself presents different issues. And so therefore, my mentor on a $4 million project probably would not have been as useful on the $100 million project. At the same time, when I look at just dealing with some of the people issues, managing a team of 25 is different than managing a team of 250. Again, more challenges. And so you need a more experienced mentor. But I think there's a second part to that, is that as you grow in your career and as you grow in your experience and can apply different experiences from the past to something you haven't seen before, perhaps in the future, it is incumbent on you now to mentor someone that is also coming up, because not only are you learning from the mentor who is mentoring you, but you learn just as much by having to put yourself in a position of mentoring someone who you are bringing up to take your place or to do what you're doing. So I think there's two sides of that. But yeah, we live in a complex world. Projects are much more complex now than they ever were in the past. And I think without that mentorship, if we think we can go it alone, I would say no, we can't. How about yourself?
Definitely. Definitely, I'm in agreement. There's another aspect to this too. You can learn a lot of the skills of project management from a book.
Yeah.
But the leadership component, the attributes and the character of a leader cannot be demonstrated by book reading and a lecture series. It's something you have to experience. You have to be in the room with a great leader before you know charisma and charm.
Yeah.
You have to be in the middle of an argument in order to experience what debate is. And a good leader is comfortable getting into an argument, turning it into a debate, so the person who's learning, the mentee, can actually experience this. And with these human components, again, the human factor, the soft skills, that's where mentorship really shines. And so because leadership acquires mentorship as a primary training tool, I think it also applies very strongly in project management.
Yeah, in fact, that's such a huge subject, and I think we have to probably dedicate a whole show to something like that, to leadership versus management, or even the idea of conflict resolution, the fact that there is healthy conflict and sometimes there's unhealthy conflict, and how to tell the difference. And there's so much there to unpack that we'd have to do separate shows.
Yeah, I've opened up a can of worms here, haven't I?
But what you're saying is exactly right, because a mentor, I think, also has a lot of the qualities that we expect in a leader. And I think we will do a different show on this, but I will say this: not all managers are leaders. Not all leaders are good managers. But boy, if you can get one that can do both.
Yeah, they have a lot of wisdom to impart. So there's one more comment about project management and its focus on mentorship. Part of the need of the world around you when you're a project manager is they need to know things and learn things, and they need to be self-aware, and they need to learn patience, and they need to learn conflict management. You don't hold this when you're a project manager. You don't hold this to yourself.
Right.
This is not information you hoard. This is information you distribute, because that's what makes a project successful. Everybody in your team knows how exactly we're going to manage conflict. And we're not going to use argument. We're going to use debate. We're going to resolve issues where they are, raise them quickly. And again, mentorship actually aspires to fit that role really well. And of course, the first people that we practice our mentorship on is ourselves. Who gives us discipline when we have to finish that report for university? Who says that you have to get that schedule, tightened up before you go to bed? Yeah. You have to.
Right.
And so again, it sounds trite, but you are your first and your bestest mentor. And that's what the material says. But, I've experienced that for myself. When you learn that you can't let yourself down, all of a sudden the game really changes, and you actually turn into somebody that you can start listening to.
Yeah. And I noticed that also on projects. I think what you just talked about in terms of you are your own best self-discipliner. I'm retired from the airplanes, the weekly plane trips, and the long 100-hour weeks or 80-hour weeks on project sites. that is all behind me. But at the same time, I feel that as I impart my learnings to the world of project management through shows like this, through my website, through my blogs and that sort of thing, there's a discipline there that I have carried over from my project management days now into my retiring from full-time consulting days. And that is, I still get up in the morning. I still write my blog at a certain time. I still prepare for my podcast at a certain time. I still work on my self-education at a certain time. So you're right. There is that self-discipline that, having learned that, I think you alluded to the fact that we learned it back in college, having to get a report in because we want to get a decent grade. So if we're looking at it from that, we're looking at how we've taught ourselves all through the years, and that just doesn't disappear. Once we've mentored ourselves and have been mentored, later on when we're doing other things, those skills or those traits come back into being. And so I have valued how I've mentored myself and also those who have mentored me, particularly now in my after career, my second career after my first career.
Right, right, right. Um, I have a big question from you, for you. You have a good idea and a pretty strong definition of mentorship. This is a little bit out of left field, but I would suggest everybody to ask this question. Um, you okay, let's consider that you have a unique way of looking at mentors and mentorship. How would you describe the way you look as being unique from everyone else?
Well, I'm clearly, from this discussion, we've been on this for almost 45 minutes. I think yours and my discussion show that we have very similar approaches to mentorship. But here's what I did notice in my career, I believe. Much like you and I have talked about in terms of mentorship being relationship and mentorship being something where the student must be ready to have the teacher arrive and stuff. A lot of what I noticed, I witnessed and experienced on major projects, even with some of the major corporations that I dealt with, is that mentorship was almost a favoritism, where the project manager would pick his 2 or 3 favorites and pour into them at the expense of others. And it was almost as though, it's one thing to pick up an apprentice and do, but a project manager's, his or her job is to mentor the team. And if you have a team of 300, you can't do that, but you can mentor the leads who mentor those team members. And so I think, in looking at it from a different perspective, I personally, in those situations, mentored the entire group that I was responsible for. I didn't just pick my favorites. I think that's one aspect. The other aspect is, so many project managers that I worked with, whether I worked for them or consulted with their organization in working alongside them or whatever it was, so many of them focused their mentorship on the skills. This is how you do earned value. This is how you do percent complete. This is how you calculate SPI or whatever the latest trend was. But did they ever sit down with someone over coffee and say, I noticed that you're having trouble with one of your teammates. Can you relate that to me, and how can I help heal that wound? How can I help you so that you both so I can get most of both out of both of you on this project? And so, they kind of forget that. And we're all about the people side when we're dealing with this. I think a lot of mentorship, they don't deal with the people side so much as they do with the process and the technology. And I think that's how I would take my definition of mentorship, different from what I've seen a lot on projects. How about yourself, Tim?
I think that I have a little more expansive a definition. For instance, I don't think that all mentors know that they're mentors. Let's reflect on what you said. When that person was treating you really poorly in the middle of the street, they didn't intend to be teaching you, and yet you did that. And we don't realize the definition of communication
Yeah.
is fascinating to me. It's the exchange of information two ways, but nobody hears the last part, intentional or unintentional. And I believe mentorship is the same way. It's the imparting of a relationship, intentional or unintentional. And some of my most powerful mentors didn't intend to be mentors. That supervisor that looked like Herman Munster, no, he wasn't mentoring me. He was just being who he was. He was truly authentic. But the way he did rang a bell inside somewhere in me. It said, I like to be that person. I don't want to let that person down. They have something to teach me. I'm going to listen to every single word. And so that basically that's how I would say, I'm a little bit different in the way you look at mentors.
Yeah. Although I can see where you're coming from, and I think part of my example with where I noticed that project managers would pick their favorites and pour themselves into those favorites. Some of that was, I mean, I don't know if they did it consciously or unconsciously, but to me, maybe I learned from that saying, don't ever do that. Good for those two or three that he poured or she poured her life into, but bad for the other ones who also wanted to learn just as much. So yeah, I get you. I get where you're coming from.
Yeah, and I've been in this situation. I was director of mentorship here for a while with the local PMI chapter, and it oftentimes, again, you're following a strict moral and ethical code, which is being objective, and yet you do have to prioritize, and you're checking yourself all the time. Am I inserting bias into my decision making, and how do I actually do this in such a way that it doesn't impact people in a negative manner? And actually what I was talking about was I learned over a couple years, it took me a while, after worrying about this all the time, I said, no, Tim, just do what you always do. Just be real.
Yeah,
Listen to what your heart, mind, and your stomach tell you, and you'll do the right thing. And if you don't do the right thing, you're conscientious enough that you'll clean up the mess and you'll make sure that you leave things a little better than they were before. And that's the best you can do.
yeah. So in your mind, having gone through this discussion that we have in the few minutes that we have left, thinking about, and again, from a project management perspective, how would you describe, say, I don't want to say perfect, but say an optimal professional mentorship from a project manager's perspective? How would you, and put yourself in the place of a mentee as opposed to a mentor? What would you look for in a mentor?
I need somebody who's compassionate yet not empathetic. They understand and are aware of my need to grow and develop, but they're not caught up in the drama that I'm working with, because mentees get caught up in the emotional swirls. And as a mentor, the perfect mentor, is expected to be a little bit above that and able to, like talk them off the ledge, or give them some grounding so they can actually approach this from a thoughtful manner, instead of just diving in and trying to make a mess and sort it out. That's the hallmark of the perfect mentor. It's creating that calm, safe space where better decisions can be made.
And I think what I take from that too is that the mentor, you don't want the mentor just taking the issue out of the mentee's hands and doing it for them.
Oh, no.
Because that, you get into a lot of issues that way as well, I think.
Yeah, that's a management 101 lesson that we learn. When you take work out of people's hands, they have no opportunity to learn, and they have no opportunity to gain respect.
Yeah.
Another piece of this is when a mentor takes sides. you have to have a mentor who's objective, because a mentor has to, they're talking about human behavior and emotional intelligence. And part of that is being able to put yourself in other people's shoes, even if you disagree with them.
Yeah.
And so when you have a mentor that's demonstrating they're not doing that, it's not that it's scary, but it's a warning sign that says, we may want to look for somebody else to help us with this.
Yeah. When I was in consulting, we had this, I think I referred to it before, we had this saying, don't ever commit a CLM, which was a career limiting move.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes there were times on a project and you make a stupid move or do something that jeopardizes the client relationship or whatever.
Yeah.
I think at that point, your mentor has two things that he needs to be able to do with you. One is to show you the error of your ways, and two, maybe usher you off to another project.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Because,
And yeah, I had my first project management mentor in consulting had been doing projects for about 18 or 19 years. And he had his 150 laws, right? You don't have to follow the 150 laws. Yes. Resume generating event. I like that.
Raymond's on the ball today. Thank you for my comment. Yeah. Raymond said he'd rather have a CLM than an RGE, a resume generating event. Very
Yeah.
good. We're gonna
Yeah.
have to get Raymond on the show with us with some of
So my mentor had 150 laws, and I swear he was making them up as he went, but he actually had them written down. And they were, if you want to fail a project, don't follow this. You're free to walk off the end of a cliff once.
points.
And again, these are the mentors that you have. They're objective. They allow you to see all aspects of the perspective, and they're there for you to experience and not just gain knowledge.
I think I must have had a similar mentor to you, because I remember this was a project in the Midwest, and I came to my project manager one time. I was a little frustrated because I could not, and get this. This is the sign of an inexperienced systems analyst. I could not get the client to do what I needed him to do. And in this case, it was a very recalcitrant client who just basically was not up to doing the work. That was, anyway, he was, the fault was, in this case, experienced or not, the case was with the client. And my project manager had a list, he had a poster on the side of his cubicle wall, much like your 150, I think he had 52 or something, probably one for every week. He pointed to, I think it was number 13. Number 13 was, never try to teach a pig to sing. It wastes your time and it annoys the pig.
Yes.
And this is years later, and I still remember that, because there are some people, the old thing was, don't try to bring a horse to water. You can't make them drink. It's the same kind of thing. There's certain people that you have to work with in different ways to have them also progress the project forward. And you can't always force them to do things your way. So
Yeah. The best you can do is find some type of influence or motivation
yeah,
that moves them without them being aware. Um, I tell you, so much of our work, when we come back to this, we talk about this 5 or 6 times on this show each time we meet. So much of our work is learning how to become aware of human behavior.
yeah,
And it's not that human behavior is good or bad. It's a natural force, like a hurricane or a tornado. And the more we're aware of it, the more we're prepared, we can pull something out of our pack. And these mentors have been doing it for so long
yeah,
that they have a pretty deep pack. I, I respect the people who took the time to actually help me along the way, but I am lucky that I didn't make so many career limiting moves that I did. It's not because I was smart. It was just the luck of the draw. And I was able to have people who were patient with me and said, "Poor Tim," they pat my head and gave me a Southern compliment, right? "Aren't you so cute?"
Bless his heart.
Yeah, and they were able to actually coach and mentor me in such a way that I didn't gain shame and I didn't lose self-respect.
Yeah.
To get back to your comment, to end up that last question, what's a perfect mentor? They allow you to learn in such a way that you don't take the shame and regret with you. You
Well,
actually grow from it.
and you said you didn't make that many CLMs, probably because of good mentorship. And I think you used the word luck. Um, I, a gentleman, I don't remember who this was, but it was one of my mentors, said, just think of luck as being LUCK, laboring under correct knowledge.
Yes.
So if I'm laboring under correct knowledge that's been imparted to me by my mentor, I have a good mentor-mentee relationship.
Yep.
And I think if I can come back to that, I think also if I want to add to what makes a good relationship, I think it's a two-way street always. I think the mentee has to be willing to listen and willing to then try things that the mentor helps him with or her with. And then I think from a mentor, it can't be just, this is what the book says. I think the mentor has to come from a heart place where they really want to see this other person succeed and improve the quality of their life, of their career, whatever it is. And that mentorship comes out back to what you said when we started, relationship. And when it's a two-way relationship, the mentee willing to listen and try things, the mentor willing to put his heart into it, not just his mind, I think that's the perfect symbiotic relationship of two people who can, or more than two people who can work together to progress the project or progress their lives or progress whatever betterment they have in store for themselves.
Yeah, it's about the why, not the how and the what. And
Yeah.
it's being able to recognize the mentee as an equal and take the time and understand, you have 20 years of working with this stuff and this mentee doesn't even know it exists. And it's actually taking that time to explain the context. And this is why we do it this way. It's not just do it this way.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, Tim, I think this has been a great, I've enjoyed this conversation, and I hopefully that we've been able to impart some wisdom from our collective, I don't want to say wisdom, from our collective experience. No, I'll say wisdom. We're old enough to have wisdom. But in the minute or so we have left, where could people find you, Tim, if they have any questions for you?
Look for me over at LinkedIn. You can find me. I'm a consultant and advisor down here in New Mexico. I'm the only Tim Jerome in New Mexico, so it's easy to connect with me, and I connect with anybody who who would like that. You can message me through there. I may not get to you for about 4 or 5 days. I'm a little busy right now, but please do so. I'm always happy to chat you up. If you give me if you want to talk to me directly, message me in LinkedIn and we can set aside time. But give me about 24 to 48 hours to shuffle my schedule around. And you, Merv?
I can be found also at LinkedIn, Merv Jersak, and I've got my company page out there on LinkedIn as well, People First Project Management. And then I've also got a website, which is www. Do I have to say that? peoplefirstprojectmanagement.com. And there I've got some, actually, I just completed 52 weeks of blogging on the whole people aspects in parallel to PMBOK instruction. So I'm hoping that it becomes if people want to learn in terms of people and process, then that's a good place to come. But yeah, I've enjoyed this time. And next week, I believe we're going to be talking about communication challenges, effective communication, channels of communication that we have as project managers.
Very good. That is going to be fun as well.
That will be fun.
And Raymond, thank you for your comments. I really appreciate it. And everybody out there, How can you find this podcast online? We can share the link with you. I think I have it.
Yeah, it's not, we can put it in. We can, we're getting our YouTube channel set up, so we'll have the recordings there, and then also the podcast channel. The way you found it to get here today is exactly the way to find it every single week. And I can send you that offline as well, Raymond. I think our time is up, and until next week, Tim, good talking to you again.
Yes, it is. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great week. Thank you, Merv, for the opportunity, and looking forward to talking to you next week.
And likewise with you, Tim. Thank you.